I've had some crazy experiences in my life, but nothing compares to the day I almost found myself facing down a police officer who was supposed to protect me. It started like any other day, until I was pulled over by a cop who didn't seem to care about anything but his own biases. The moment he stepped out of his car, I could feel the tension building. He didn't look at me as a person. He saw something else entirely. And then it happened. He insulted me, straight to my face, and without a second thought, pointed his gun at me. I was stunned. How could this be happening? But here's the twist. What he didn't know was that I wasn't just some regular person. I wasn't going to let this slide without a fight. You see, I wasn't just anyone who could be treated like this. I was a prosecutor. I knew the law. I knew exactly how to handle this, and I wasn't going to let him get away with it. But what happened next? What did I do when I stood up to him? You'll have to stick around to find out. Trust me, you don't want to miss how this story unfolds. The moment the officer pointed the gun at me, my heart was racing. I could feel my pulse in my throat. I wasn't scared, but more in disbelief. I'd dealt with police before, but this was different. This officer wasn't just enforcing the law, he was letting his prejudices show. His eyes locked onto mine, and there was no mistaking the contempt in them. It was as if he had already decided who I was, just by looking at me. But I couldn't let him intimidate me. I'd spent years studying the law, fighting for justice. I'd worked cases where people's lives were ruined by a single bad decision. I wasn't going to let this man make that mistake. As I sat there, I thought about what he didn't know about me. The prosecutor badge I wore wasn't just a title, it was a reminder of what I stood for: justice, fairness, and accountability. I kept my calm, my voice steady, as I looked him in the eyes. "You don't know who you're dealing with," I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I realized that this wasn't going to be a normal interaction. It was about to get much more complicated, and I wasn't sure if I was ready for what was coming next. The officer's hand tightened on his gun, and for a second, it felt like time had stopped. He didn't say a word, but the tension in the air was suffocating. I could hear the sound of my own breathing, each exhale louder than the last. I had to think fast. I couldn't just sit there and wait for him to decide my fate. The thought of him pulling the trigger was a terrifying one, but more than that, I couldn't ignore the feeling that this was part of something bigger, something darker. As I sat in the car, I thought about everything that had led up to this moment. How many times had I seen cases where the system failed? How many times had people been judged not for who they were, but for how they looked? How often had I fought tooth and nail for justice, only to watch corruption slip through the cracks? This wasn't just about me and this officer. It was about everything I had seen and fought against in my career. But still, there was the question of what this officer knew. His expression said it all. He didn't recognize me, and I realized just how crucial that was. He saw me as just another person on the side of the road, an inconvenience to deal with. What if I hadn't been a prosecutor? What would have happened then? As the minutes dragged on, I weighed my options. I could play it cool, try to de-escalate, but something in my gut told me this wasn't going to be that simple. There was something about this encounter that felt orchestrated, as if I was being tested in a way I hadn't anticipated. But tested by whom? And why? The questions were piling up faster than I could process, and the more I tried to think clearly, the more I realized that what I was facing wasn't just a rogue cop. It was something much bigger. I could feel the air thick with tension, the silence between us only broken by the faint hum of my car's engine. His grip on the gun didn't loosen. It was like he was waiting for something. I wasn't sure what, but I could sense that he was hoping I'd make a wrong move, one that would give him the excuse he needed. But I wasn't going to give him that satisfaction. I kept my hands visible on the steering wheel, my voice calm, but inside, my mind was racing. What if I was wrong? What if I misjudged this situation, and it turned deadly? But I had been trained for moments like this, hadn't I? As a prosecutor, I had been in situations where life and death were on the line, where the wrong word could make all the difference. But this wasn't a courtroom. This was real life, and it was getting uglier by the second. The officer's eyes never left mine, and I could see the anger and frustration building in his. He wasn't used to someone standing their ground. The power dynamic was shifting, and I could tell he didn't like it. His voice came out low, almost growling. "You're making a big mistake." I couldn't help but wonder if those words were meant for me or for himself. But before I could even process that, something in the back of my mind clicked. This wasn't just a random act of aggression. There was a reason he was here, a reason he was so unhinged. And in that moment, it hit me. This wasn't about me at all. It was about something much bigger, something I couldn't yet see. My pulse quickened. Whatever was coming next, it wasn't going to be something I could talk my way out of. The stakes had just been raised, and I had to be ready for whatever came next. Just as the tension between us reached its breaking point, I heard a sudden noise, sharp, almost like a whisper in the air. My instincts kicked in, but before I could react, a second officer emerged from behind my car. I hadn't even noticed him until now. He was standing off to the side, his face hidden in shadow, but the gleam of his badge caught the streetlight. My stomach sank. 2 officers. The situation just became a whole lot more complicated. The first officer's hand twitched, and I knew he had seen the second one too. There was something off about the way they moved, like they were in sync, but not in a good way. This wasn't just a routine traffic stop anymore. I had been set up. There was no other explanation for this sudden escalation. The second officer stepped forward, his tone cold as he looked at me, then back at his partner. "He doesn't know yet, does he?" he said, almost mockingly. The first officer stiffened, and for a split second, I saw a flicker of fear in his eyes. I wasn't sure who they were referring to or what they meant, but that didn't matter right now. I could feel the walls closing in, and I realized this wasn't just a random act of aggression, it was calculated. These officers weren't acting alone. Someone was pulling the strings behind the scenes, and I was caught right in the middle of it. Everything inside me screamed to make a move, but I knew that any wrong step could be the last one I'd ever take. What had I just walked into? What was the real reason behind this encounter? And how far would these officers go to cover up whatever it was they were involved in? The second officer's words echoed in my head, and in that moment I realized I was standing on the edge of something much bigger than I had ever imagined. The tension was so thick, I could almost taste it. I needed answers, and fast. My mind raced, connecting dots I hadn't even noticed before. The first officer was shaken now, his stance less sure. Something wasn't right. I don't know what you're talking about," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, but steady. I wasn't sure if I was trying to convince him or myself. The second officer didn't even flinch. He stepped closer, the coldness in his eyes now sharp, almost predatory. "Guess we'll find out soon enough," he said with a dark smile, pulling out his phone. He tapped a few times, then showed it to the first officer. I saw a familiar face on the screen, someone I knew well, someone from my past. It was a judge I had worked with on several high-profile cases, a man who had always seemed untouchable. Everything hit me like a punch to the gut. The officers weren't just dirty, they were involved in something far more sinister. The judge had been corrupt for years, using his power to manipulate cases, frame innocent people, and cover up crimes. And now these officers were working with him. They had planned this entire encounter to intimidate me, to silence me before I could go public with the evidence I had uncovered about the judge's involvement in a massive criminal syndicate. The first officer turned to me, his face now drained of all confidence. "You've been digging, haven't you?" he growled, his gun still trained on me. "You're a problem." I took a deep breath, the reality of the situation finally settling in. "No, you're the problem," I said, my voice suddenly firm. I wasn't going to let these men intimidate me anymore. Just as I was about to make my move, the sound of sirens wailed in the distance. I knew this wasn't a coincidence. Someone had tipped off the authorities, someone who had been keeping an eye on me. It was my moment, and I knew what I had to do. As the second officer fumbled with his phone, trying to silence it, I reached for my badge and held it up high, letting it gleam under the streetlights. Before they could react, a voice shouted from behind me, "Freeze! Police!" A team of officers swarmed the scene, their guns drawn, but this time they were on my side. The second officer tried to flee, but he was quickly tackled to the ground. The first officer, realizing his game was up, dropped his weapon and raised his hands in surrender.